teachings of Baha'u'llah and the message that the oneness of humanity is a strength that we can unite around for the advancement of civilization. We aim to learn, collaborate, and transform our society alongside you. So before we get started, let's just cover a little housekeeping. As you can see, we're in a webinar, meaning the only faces you'll see are the ones that you're seeing right now. If you're a viewer, we can't see you and we can't hear you, but you can send in questions that you have or comments at any time using the chat option. If you were viewing this in Zoom, just go to the bottom bar and you'll see a chat icon. Click on that and you can send in your questions to us. And please feel free to send them in at any time. If you're viewing this on YouTube, you can also do the same and we will see that as well. So tonight our presenter is Dr. Nura Mowzoon. Tonight she'll be sharing some insights with us around what science and the Baha'i faith have to say about how to nurture healthy relationships in a time such as this, when we're at home a lot and we're under some stress. So Dr. Mowzoon completed her doctoral and master's degree in marriage and family therapy at Nova Southeastern University in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Her training at Nova Southeastern University also included a specialization in medical family therapy and a post-doctoral certificate in hypnotherapy. Dr. Mowzoon is based outside of Phoenix, Arizona. She has over 10 years of experience in helping couples and individuals develop healthy relationship skills. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Nura.
Well, thank you, Jessica.
You're welcome.
Really happy to be back here with everybody today. Hello to everyone on the screen and everybody tuning in.
And I forgot to introduce Robert. I'm so sorry.
Yes.
Robert is the administrator of Green Acre. He's going to be running the tech side of things. There he is. Everybody say hi, Robert. So he's going to be kind of looking for people's questions on YouTube, and he may stay in here or he may go invisible for a little bit. So don't worry, he's okay. Like that. Okay, sorry, go ahead, Nura.
No. Yeah, so I really, really welcome, I just want to say from the outset, I really welcome all questions and comments just from the very beginning. I didn't even want to really make this any kind of like presentation-ish thing. But when you do something like this over Zoom, visual prompts, I guess, are helpful and more necessary since we're not in person and I can't, perform for you guys the way that I would. So, but please interrupt, derail, do whatever you like to do, because I want to speak to what matters to everybody, not what I think you guys want to hear about. So, yeah, so I guess we can did Robert already leave?
Yeah, he peaced out.
But wait, isn't he going to put up the slideshow?
I will indeed. I have not left. I just turned into the peace flag, but I'm still here.
Okay.
And I totally didn't even talk about the other people on the screen. I'm so sorry.
These
are folks that we invited in because we need to have a conversation of some sort, and it would be, not nearly as interesting if it was just Nura and I talking back and forth about.
Wow.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
So these lovely people graciously agreed to be here and ask questions they may have.
Yes. Okay. So what I wanted the trajectory that I kind of laid out for the slideshow today is just kind of talking a little bit about the time that we're living in right now, which is so unique and so bizarre, and how it could be affecting us as individuals and how that as a result is inevitably going to affect our relationships. And then from there, talk a little bit about how to navigate these dynamics, because stuff is going to be coming up for us individually as couples. How do we work our way through this stuff, and a few things that we should keep in mind as we interact with each other, especially in close quarters. I'm guessing most of you guys are in quarantine, or like as much quarantine as you could be in if you're, an essential worker. So then a couple tips for resolving conflicts in a healthy way, and just kind of take it wherever it naturally goes. So maybe we could put the magic slide up.
Yay!
Okay. So we can move on to the next slide. I wish I could just do this myself and not expect.
I know.
Okay. Okay, stop. I'm just kidding. So, so yeah, I just wanted to kind of acknowledge, like I started to a second ago, just acknowledge how unique this time is and how profound of an experience it is for a lot of us. Some of us are feeling it on a very surface, very obvious level where we're very much maybe battling anxiety that we have about it, or battling depression, or feeling more pensive or concerned or whatever. And I think some of us are just maybe processing it on a like deeper, maybe more subconscious level. So either way, I think it's pretty safe to say that it's affecting all of us in one way or another. And because of that, because it's something that's so unexpected and unfamiliar, there is no right way to process this. There's no right way to process what really is considered collective trauma by most mental health experts, that what we're going through right now is a type of mass trauma, collective trauma. So I really want to set the stage with this giant question mark, really, that A, we don't know what to expect, and B, there is actually no right way to process this. So there's going to be a lot of confusing behavior, a lot of confusing emotions, and we just need to work our way through all of this, and also just offer the validation that whatever you are feeling in this moment is okay. Like whether you're feeling peace, whether you're feeling panic, anxiety, fear, excitement for maybe the positive changes that could potentially come out of this and that are already coming out of this, it's all legit, it's all valid. And so because of this, it's really, really important for us to be patient with ourselves, patient with other people, but also patient with ourselves. And I think sometimes we forget that. When I hear a lot of people reflecting on how this is affecting society and the world around them, there's actually a lot of, and it's quite heartwarming, there's a lot of concern for our loved ones, and patience for our loved ones and how they're processing this. But I haven't heard a lot of patience with ourselves and like love for ourselves in the process that we're experiencing through this. And so I think it's critical to remember that it's not a selfish thing. Are you guys good? Do we have any thoughts or questions so far? Okay, I really don't want this to feel like a lecture, so don't let it.
Do we also have to be patient with our children?
No, not those guys.
Okay.
No, forget those guys. Woo!
Okay, I was worried.
Okay, we can go on to the next slide. Okay, and I basically already said this, that it's just important for us to realize that a lot of issues are coming to the surface. But I was having a really interesting conversation with a friend of mine earlier today about how it feels like an especially vulnerable time right now, because in this space of being quarantined to our homes, we're actually confined to the space where most of us actually feel the most vulnerable and the most reflective. So I think not only is the outside world going through this turmoil that is going to affect us, but also we're in a space where it's the most vulnerable for us. So it kind of amplifies what it is that we're going through, if that makes sense. We're forced to kind of sit with our thoughts. We, sorry, my roommates are looking at me and making eye. Do you have a question?
No, we're gonna watch you, but I was like, so let's just watch you guys.
You can watch. No, actually, well, yeah. whatever. Okay, I'm sorry. So anyway, so being in this vulnerable space is bringing up a lot of stuff. And there's only so many ways that we can distract ourselves. You know, we have technology, we have the internet, we have Netflix, we have our smartphones and whatever, but it's no matter how many distractions we have, I think most of us can acknowledge that we've been forced to slow down and process and think. So maybe we could go on to the next slide. I think there's a quote there that I wanted us to reflect on. Okay, so this quote is from Shoghi Effendi. For the viewers who are maybe watching who don't know very much about the Baha'i faith, I'm gonna just include a couple quotes throughout this talk. And then if you're curious to learn more about the Baha'i faith, you know, we can offer resources at the end of the talk. But I think I only have like 2, maybe 3 in here. And this is a quote from one of the main figures of our Baha'i faith, of the Baha'i, not our Baha'i faith, of the Baha'i faith. Does one of you want to read it? Jessica, do you want to read it? Or Devin, read it.
Why not? We cannot segregate the human heart from the environment outside us and say that once one of these is reformed, everything will be improved. Man is organic with the world. His inner life molds the environment and is itself also deeply affected by it. The one acts upon the other, and every abiding change in the life of man is the result of these mutual reactions.
So for those of you who are in this space with me right now, I don't know if any of you have thoughts on this, if there's any reflections on what this quote is saying. If you guys have any thoughts or feelings about it. And how it relates to what we're talking about today in society today.
Yeah, well, when I read it, I was just thinking about how that we're just existing in this time where we're really aware of how the suffering of others is the suffering of ourselves too. So just in addition to feeling or experiencing whatever emotions are in our families and our household, that I've just felt really aware of, just the weight of awareness of the suffering happening in the world and how that I just can feel how that is impacting me.
Yeah, absolutely. It says in here, man is organic with the world, and our inner life molds the environment and is also deeply affected by it, and that one acts upon the other. So there's no real separation between our inner self, our spiritual side, our beings, and the reality of what's going on around us. And at the same time, that what is going on around us is a reflection of what we're experiencing inside. So one acts upon the other. Are there any other thoughts before we go on to the next slide?
Yeah, I think same along the lines of what my spouse was saying is you see a lot of the positives that are going on in the world, the way the environment is changing, the way that nature is kind of taking to this. And there's sometimes a little guilt in feeling happy for those blessings, while so many other people are feeling challenged and so many other people are feeling lost.
That's a really, really interesting perspective, because I think you're right. There is this feeling of guilt in experiencing any kind of like joy or gratitude or hope, because so many people are suffering at the same time. Yeah, absolutely.
Laurel, you unmuted yourself for a second. Were you going to say something? Well, I mean, couple S, sorry.
I was just thinking that it goes the other way too, that this is, I think this time period it has been most apparent that my individual actions affect others. Just me staying at home has an impact. Whereas before that was true as well, my actions always had an effect on the world and the people in my world, but it wasn't, I don't know that I believed it to the same extent that I do now. It was more an act of faith, and now it seems more of a reality.
How do you see it manifesting? Like what are examples of it that you feel like sharing? No pressure, we're all just staring at you.
I don't know. It's hard to know. To be perfectly honest, we live in a world that is not based on truth. So it's hard to even figure out how to act. What is the best way to act in a world where you don't know where truth can be found? But I was just referring to keeping our family at home and social distancing and trusting that that is the best thing to do and that that has an effect on us.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Any other thoughts on this before I move on?
Yeah, actually, I love that because I think I grew up in a space where they tell you things like, you know, do unto others and one good deed deserves another. And as you do these good deeds and do these good things, you don't see how that reciprocates down the line. But if I go out sick, I am going to see how that negative action is going to reciprocate down the line. Or if someone else goes out sick, so your individual actions, you can really see or statistically see how that can affect everyone else. So just by staying home, I am doing something good.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a really good point that we can actually see physical examples of what happens as a result of the actions that we take, for better or for worse. You know, this idea of flattening the curve and how things spread and whatever, we actually have a physical manifestation of how quickly we impact the society around us. Let's go on to the next slide. So I just wanted to cover a couple basic points. I think, you know, there's a lot of emphasis on like, how do we navigate this space with our significant others? But within that it's also really critical to understand that one of the best ways to navigate this space is to take care of yourself in the process of it. Like, you are responsible for your own well-being as well. And doing the self-maintenance that you need in order to be the best partner possible in this current state of affairs. So I listed a couple of things that might seem like no big deal, but or kind of obvious, but I did feel the need to point it out anyway, because these are all critical aspects of living our best lives. So the first one is a healthy diet. In times of stress, often we turn to sugar, right? So sugar is the comfort food for so many of us, and it is also deeply affecting of the moods of so many of us. You know, so many people, when they have sugar, become angry or short-tempered, maybe hyper or whatever. We don't realize that it's actually a drug that can actually affect how we are and who we are, even though it's temporary. But we turn to it because our body craves it, and because we're in states of high stress. I'm not a dietitian, so I'm not going to like go into this too much. But we crave it, but then it also works against us in times like this, when really we should be eating foods that are healthier and more sustaining for our mental and physical well-being. There's also recent research coming out, and I'm not versed in it enough to say more than what I'm about to say, but recent research coming out about the connection between COVID and sugar intake. So there's even, that's my understanding of it, but I'm just going to leave it there for you guys to research on your own. But maintaining a healthy diet, it's not just about like, oh, don't gain weight because you can't exercise that much these days or you can't move as much. It's that what you put into your system affects the way you think and the way that you carry yourself and who you are to your partner or to your children. Time outside, you know, vitamin D, mood enhancer, got to do it. Exercise, movement, this is all basic stuff. Making sure you get as much sleep as you can. I've been talking to a lot of people who have been struggling with insomnia ever since this happened. People who just cannot sleep enough, early enough. They don't sleep deeply enough because of the weight of everything and how much it is for them to process. But all of these things that are listed here are connected with one another. So the better your diet is, the more movement you get, the better you're going to sleep. And prayer and meditation, I listed it last, but I would say is one of the most important, if not the most important. Time to just go inward, even if you don't identify as being religious, time to just sit and be, maybe read writings or poetry or whatever it is that feels like it's nourishing you on some level, and just being still for a moment. So all of these things that are listed here inform one another, and they're critical for your mental well-being, for healthy dynamics with one another, and for a healthy relationship with yourself. Do any of you guys want to add to this, or are there any questions or anything?
I might be jumping the gun here, but I think at some point it would be great to talk about boundaries and
the next slide.
Oh, is it really?
Yeah.
I actually have something to add on this. For me, my best form of like prayer and meditation is actually doing what really sustains me, and that is my artwork. And I really hadn't done my studio practice in probably over a year since we moved here. And I just recently decided that I have to do it for my, you know, spiritual well-being, but also for my basic mental health. That if I'm not drawing or painting in some way, it's not good for me, and it's not good for everybody else around me.
Well, your art is amazing, Devin. So, you know, we all benefit from it. So please keep it up.
Thank you.
Were there other thoughts? Are you gonna say something? Yeah.
Well, I feel like we've really been given an opportunity here in this regard, where our canvases have been wiped clean. All the things that we used to fill our lives with, we can't anymore. And we're all going crazy. And so this list right here is really necessary if we're going to survive this mentally intact and physically intact. So it's really given me the opportunity to reprioritize. I'm honestly grateful that we're not running in a million directions, because we do get outside every day. We do pray as a family together, and that never happened before. This guy over here is cooking dinner every night. Hallelujah.
Feels like
a lot of wonderful things have come.
Great. That's really, really great. Yeah, I think sometimes we take for granted these few things that are so useful for us, you know, and we're like, I just want to shut down, and I just want to watch 12 hours of Netflix and eat hot Cheetos and ice cream. Hopefully not together. That just sounds painful. But, you know, we think it's our right to indulge, and it absolutely is. It's your right to do what you want to do. But at the same time, there are always repercussions and consequences, you know, so you might indulge, but then you also could pay the price later. So it's important to keep in mind.
This is my question about boundaries. So it's not only you that pays the price, it's also your spouse that pays the price. So, so where is the line between, that's between you and God and, excuse me, what you're doing is also affecting me and the family. And I mean, totally theoretical, of course.
Totally hypothetical.
I have every right
Hypothetical.
to eat as much chocolate as I wish. And chips.
You do, but then if it's going to affect your behavior, she has every right to call you out on it.
Okay.
Give me permission.
Permission granted. So,
it's like, stay on your side of the street.
But I mean, and we'll get to like the healthy ways to address this sort of thing, because it's true. Like it's always just this dance of figuring out, where does my individuality stop, and the reality of us as a couple start. There's no perfect formula for it. All you can do is actually implement tools to deal with it as it comes up. So we'll talk about that.
Cool.
Are there any other thoughts so far?
I was just gonna say that I appreciate just the relevance of this, because in addition to what that does for ourselves, I also have felt really aware of, a lot of us are more intensely responsible for the well-being of others in this time in our own household, right? So whether that's because, in our example, we have a child, but we also live with my in-laws and with my brother-in-law who has special needs. And so we have a lot of responsibility of caretaking to our family and to our household. And so I know I've experienced in the last few weeks that every time I've reached like a snapping point where I've behaved in a way that I didn't want to, I raised my voice or I stormed out of a room or something like that. I just had this awareness. I literally the other day snapped at my daughter and said, every moment of today I've spent doing something for someone else. And that was actually what I said out loud, which I immediately felt horrible about. Not only because I shouldn't have said that to my child, but just the awareness of, okay, I'm going to go take 10 minutes and do the thing that I need to do for myself so that I'm not, so that I can take care of others with joy and generosity and in the nurturing way that I want to, and not do it in a way where I'm going to end up feeling, badly.
Yeah. No, and that's a beautiful point, because it's these tips that we're talking about, it's not intended to be self-serving. It's intended to keep you at your best space, at your best level, so that you can continue to be of service to the people around you and also maintain your own well-being through it all. It's kind of like, they talk about on the airplanes, if the oxygen mask drops, put it on yourself first before you put it on anybody else. And they're not telling you to save yourself first and screw the rest of the world. Maybe you'll get to them. They're telling you take care of yourself so that you're capable to then help the people around you. So, I think for those of us who were like very other oriented and very altruistic and very selfless, it's hard for us to draw these boundaries and say, I need 10 minutes to just pray, or I need to go outside and walk for 20 minutes. Like, I have to do this. But when we realize that we're doing this because it helps keep us in our best space, it's actually a service to the people around us. It isn't selfish. It's a contribution to the dynamic around you.
It's become very clear in our family that the more I pray and meditate, the happier everybody is.
I know I'm happier when you pray and meditate. So,
and likewise, the more I get to go for a walk or go cycling, everybody is, does much better.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Great. I'm glad this slide resonated with you guys so much. We can go on to the next one. So this, and Jess, this is what I thought you meant when you first mentioned boundaries. But this is also aligned with what we were just talking about. Because we're going through such a tricky time, I think a lot of us will see our partners and our loved ones experiencing things that are painful for us to see, and maybe painful for us to experience if we're on the receiving end of some sort of struggle. And so it's also really important, especially while we're in a space of quarantining and being in each other's circles and space 24/7, to still have emotional boundaries in place, so that we can observe their experience, but not absorb it. I'm not talking about like interpersonal conflict that needs to be addressed, but I'm talking about seeing our partners going through whatever it is that they're going through, and how essential it is for us to remain stable in that process and not get kind of caught up in the undercurrent of it all, like the quicksand of their energy. So making sure that as we see them going through what they're going through, we don't feel responsible for their pain or their healing. Obviously, being there to be a support and to be helpful to them if and when it's needed is a beautiful thing, but feeling responsible for it is a different thing. And this is where we kind of start dancing into the area of like codependency. And really, there are a lot of mental health professionals who really feel that codependency has become kind of like a national and even like an international pandemic, speaking of pandemics. And that we put our experiences onto other people, we project them onto other people, or we take it on to our own selves and feel responsible for the other person's happiness. And so I wanted to talk about that for just a little bit. So if we could go to the next slide, I put together a little slide that talks about unhealthy versus healthy dynamics within couples. You could also relabel it to codependent versus interdependent. These are pulled from this psychologist. Her name is Nicole LaPerla. It's at the bottom of the slide. And so she has some really, really useful information on it, and I just wanted to share it with you guys. So, because a lot of times we think in the name of being sensitive and nurturing, we should take on the pain of the people around us. And so what I wanted to point out is that there's an important distinction between supporting them, but then also taking on their struggle as our own. So in an unhealthy diet, so there's just a couple bullet points here that we can kind of compare and contrast. So from an unhealthy perspective, or from a codependent perspective, you might have a mindset of, I don't like your behavior is hurtful, but I know you can't help it because of your past. I know that your past is informing who you are now, and so therefore I excuse it. Versus from a healthy perspective, saying you're capable of healing, and I also have very clear boundaries. Like, I trust that you are capable of working through this, and I need to kind of draw an emotional boundary here and not take away from my own nobility because you're refusing to embrace your own. Unhealthy, I need your approval. Healthy, I enjoy your company. This is kind of a common thing. Unhealthy, I enable you to engage in negative behavior if it means connecting to me. So if we connect through you doing whatever it is that's unhealthy, I'll take it, versus I hold you accountable even if that means that you disconnect. I really want these points to sink in, because a lot of this unhealthy stuff we engage in with the intention of just being supportive and loving. But being supportive and loving doesn't have to mean that you're compromising your own well-being. Unhealthy, I'll be who you want me to be. Healthy, I'll be the person that I am. And then unhealthy, I feel what you feel and I don't feel like myself. I lose myself in your experience, versus I understand how and why you feel the way that you do. So these are very subtle differences, but I really feel like it's important for us to let these sink in a little bit, because especially these days in these close quarters, it's very easy to like cross over that bridge from the unhealthy to, or from the healthy to the unhealthy dynamic. Do you guys have any thoughts or questions about this?
So what does a conversation look like when you hold somebody, your partner, accountable, even if that means that they disconnect?
That's a really good question. So what does a conversation look like when you hold somebody accountable? What needs to happen, and actually I have a few tips, a couple slides from here. There's not that much left in here actually, on how to have difficult conversations. But the focus of your conversation should be on how you are affected by what's going on, rather than placing blame on them as a person. So rather than saying like, you always do X, Y, and Z, and I hate when you blah, 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 the focus should actually be on, when this happens, I feel this way. When this is present in our dynamic, it makes me feel unsafe. And also, if it's something that is, it depends, because different situations have different degrees of severity. If it's something that is repeating, if it's something that's highly toxic, you also draw a boundary and say, if this thing happens again, then I'm gonna have to, you fill in the blank. It's kind of hard to give this example arbitrarily, because again, it depends on the severity. But if you flake on our plans again, then if you flake on our plans again, then I am probably just not going to make plans with you for a while until this is resolved. Or if you continue to insist on spending the finances in irresponsible ways, then I am gonna have to start a separate account for the bills that we're paying, whatever it is. So it's a little bit vague in what I'm getting at, but if you have to draw lines, if you have to draw boundaries, talk about the behavior. Don't accuse, don't point fingers, but say like, if you are gonna choose to continue to do this, then I have to choose to implement boundaries for my own well-being at the same time. Does that make sense? Did I answer your question a little bit?
Can I just have another question about where it says here, your behavior may hurt me, but you can't help it because of your past. Mm-hmm. I'm interested in that because, in the earlier quote, we had talked about how we can't separate ourselves from our environment. And in the same way, our past really informs the person that we've become now for better and worse in many ways. And so I'm just interested in knowing, like it says here, you are capable of healing and I have clear boundaries. Like, what would that...
How do those coexist?
What's the balance there between acknowledging that, that your past can really manifest in a lot of ways, and how can you, have that expectation also?
So the way that I think of it, and I think I saw this written somewhere and it really resonated with me. The phrase that comes to mind is, it's not your fault if you have trauma and if you have baggage, but it is your fault if you don't do anything about it. So we all have had experiences that affect us and that could inform our tendencies and our behaviors, but it's never an excuse for us to, we never have the excuse of not addressing that and trying to heal from that. So like it says here in the first bullet point, you can't help it because of your past. And yeah, we're all interconnected with our environment, but we are not victims of it. So the minute we say you're a victim to your past versus you have experienced your past and now you can choose to rise above it, those are two different mindsets. One is saying, one is disempowering and one is empowering. Saying that you think this way and you exist this way because of the hands that the cards that you were dealt when you were younger, therefore how you're behaving is okay, is not holding them to a higher standard. And we should all be holding ourselves to a higher standard. So acknowledging that they went through pain and difficulty is critical, but allowing them to behave in unhealthy ways that affect you doesn't have to also exist with that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Sure.
I'm curious also about, because it's obviously healing from trauma is a process.
Mm-hmm.
And so like, I recognize you're capable of healing and I have clear boundaries, but I'm also recognizing that you can't heal yourself 100% in this moment right now and never do it again.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess it just comes down to us being clear about what our boundaries are.
Yeah, being clear about what your boundaries are, not feeling guilty about drawing boundaries.
Right.
And it doesn't mean that you have to go into like opposite corners and now be like, you're capable of healing, I'm over here.
Mm.
But it, you know, if somebody, like, let's say in the example, you know, they're always demanding that you prove your love for them because they have abandonment issues from childhood or something. And so they need you to always reassure them that you love them and you're not going anywhere.
Mm.
It's the healthy response to that would be to acknowledge, like, I see that it's really important for you to know that I love you.
Mm.
And I think when we're being honest, we both see that I love you and that I have been very consistent in this relationship and I'm always here for you. But I'm not going to own this responsibility of constantly proving it to you every day.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's your issue, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, but then you can continue to talk about it and be like, you know, how can I support you as we like rewrite this narrative that you have that you need to be reassured of my love? Like, what can we do together to work through this? So you can still turn towards each other to work through these issues,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not your job to enable these issues,
Mm-hmm.
to cater to them. So there's a big difference between catering to versus helping heal.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and sometimes when we know that we're coming from our trauma brain, we can say, listen, I know that I probably am not right in feeling this way, or I'm not right in my perception of the scenario,
Mm-hmm.
but here's my knee-jerk reaction to what's going on, and I need you to help me through this because my narrative is telling me right now that you don't care. I know that you care, but I'm battling this other part of me that's telling me you don't care. So like, be patient with me, help me work through this, whatever it is that you need. So we're able to have what they call this co-consciousness of, I'm hanging out in my trauma brain right now. I'm hanging out in this space that's not serving me and it's giving me these unhealthy narratives.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that I'm there and I'm working through it. Help me out, or just give me a minute. we are able to acknowledge that we are in that trauma brain. We can have that co-consciousness. And so when you communicate to your partner, I'm in this space, I'll be right out, or like, just give me a second, then you can work together, then you're teammates in it, or you give them what they need to get to the healthier space.
Nice.
Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Other questions about this?
How do we not feel what the other person feels?
I don't know that you don't feel it, but I think it's maybe more of observing the feeling rather than internalizing the feeling. You know, if you're like a deeply empathic person and you feel your partner's pain, I think that's a beautiful trait that you can tune into that. And I don't think, you know, I wouldn't want to discourage.
It's not fun.
Huh?
Not fun though.
It's not. I hear you. But I think through practice, we can kind of feel and then acknowledge and observe rather than feel and then like embody or act on.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we don't have to react to what it is that we're feeling from them. We can notice it. It can come up. We can notice it. It doesn't mean that we then have to react to it. Same within ourselves. We can notice that things are coming up and emotions are coming up. It doesn't mean we have to actually act on them.
Right. And I will say that for me, because I think we always get, people who have had trauma, which is most people these days, you know, our brains can get hijacked. We can get triggered.
For sure.
And so it's hard in that moment to respond rather than react. And what I have found is that, again, back to prayer and meditation, the more I pray and meditate, especially like if it's a daily in the morning, it's like I have way more control over my reactions.
Yeah.
And I regularly pray and meditate. I'm able to like, I might get sucked in, I might get triggered for a second, but I'm able to say, oh, wait, I'm getting triggered, and pull myself back out of it and regain control.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think giving ourselves a timeout is one of the best things that we can do. I have a couple that I'm working with right now who they're working through the husband managing his anger issues towards the kids. And he's developing this pattern now where he just tags out. Like if the kids do something to really make him, I call it turning into the Hulk, not him specifically, but like, you know, when we get to the point where we just want to crack because we're so angry and we just see red and we just want to smash everything. Hulk smash. But it's a real thing. It's actually a real physiological experience of the anger getting to points where you are actually physically incapable of rational thoughts. Like it's a physical impossibility. And so the best thing that you could do is tag out and ask your partner to jump in while you cool off, you know? And what that requires in that moment is for your partner to be supportive of that rather than accusatory.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so there has to be support there where your partner is like, I see that you need a minute, take a beat. I'll be here. I've got the kids. Come back when you're feeling like yourself again. So this is again where you have to act like teammates.
Can I add something to that? Because just speaking from our experience, I think that I'm a little too eager to take over. Like I think I'm just interested in the balance between. So if I notice that my spouse is beginning to get like irritated by the kids or whatever, I will I have this tendency to swoop in and be like, you go, I've got this. And I think that disempowers him. And I mean, it really annoys him. it's a source of conflict for us sometimes.
Do you
Sorry,
feel
what?
disempowered? I'm sorry, I don't know your name, husband.
Ben?
Ben, do you feel disempowered in those moments?
No, I think it's just more like just the way my brain works. Like, if Leah's like, oh, I'm gonna go off and do this, and can you, take care of the kids, and then I like to kind of just like be in control of the situation and do what has to be done. Yeah, so I guess it does feel a bit disempowering when, like, the minute like one of the babies is crying or like, I'm getting like a little annoyed, she comes in to like intervene. It's like, no, go off and do your thing like you said, and I've got it. So yeah, but it's not like disempowered. It's like, I don't know. I wouldn't call it disempowered.
Sorry,
Okay.
we didn't mean to hijack this into like a personal marriage therapy session, but I just wanted to point out that sometimes it's important to have a balance with it.
No, I mean, I'm sure that there are people that can identify with this, whether they're like part of this webinar. I think a lot of people can identify with it. And I think what happens often is the wife will be like, she just wants peace and she just wants quiet. And it's like, let me just do it, and
It might get messy, but let me just do it, right?
yeah, I've got this, let me just do it.
Right.
And as understandable as that is, it can be, I mean, you may not like the word disempowering, and I respect that. It could be a slightly different experience for you, but I could understand that it would be disempowering, because it's like, anytime you're trying to do somebody and somebody takes over, you're trying to do something and somebody takes over, you're just like, wait, like, give me a second, but then if they continue to take over, then you're actually never going to develop that capacity, and so anytime we want to change patterns, it's going to be uncomfortable. So anytime, if you guys are seeing anything in what we're talking about today that rings true and it's a pattern that you want to break, you will be very uncomfortable until you adjust to the new normal. So it's really important for you to recognize that. So if the wives in this chat are like, let me just do it because I just don't want to deal with it, like, you can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't expect them to embrace these things that you're asking of them to do, but then simultaneously not let them do it and not let them learn because it's too frustrating to witness it. So if you want change, you've got to be uncomfortable. This is why so many of us don't change. It's because it hurts like hell and it's aggravating and it's not familiar. And so we're constantly in this battle of what's familiar versus what's necessary change. And this is why change doesn't really happen as often as we would like, is because we just stick with familiar, because change hurts, growth hurts. And so even though where we are may not be serving us as much, it's still a lot more comfortable than like going into this uncharted territory and finding new scripts. This is another way of looking at it, is like, and this is a very like, I'm gonna be like sociology professor for 1 second, just excuse me. But like, there's a sociological understanding or perspective that we all have scripts that explain our roles of who we are in the world. You have the script of mother, you have the script of brother, you have the script of child, script of therapist, script of educator, whatever. And so these titles that we have, these labels that we have roles that come with them. And we become accustomed to each other's roles. So maybe you're the mom who gets everything done and, make sure everything is running smoothly. And then your husband is dad who does his best, but isn't as efficient as mom and fumbles a little bit and gets frustrated easily. And so over the years, these scripts become like who you are. And then the minute you decide you're going to change the script, everybody around you is like, wait a minute, what did you do? You went off script. What's happening? And now we all have to like rewrite it and figure it out. And it changes all of our dynamics with each other. And I don't know if you guys have noticed this, but anytime you go through personal growth, people around you get pissed off. And it's because you went off script. And when you go off script, they don't know, it's not familiar to them anymore. See, you go back to this idea of what's familiar. So you go off script and the people around you get confused. They'll say things like, you're different. I don't understand. Like, I don't know how to be with you anymore, whatever. And people will try to get you to go back to what they're familiar with. And so it's hard. That's why growth is really painful, because it's not just an individual thing that you go through. It's something that the entire system around you is also simultaneously experiencing with you. And it's exhausting. It's exhausting. I'm talking a lot. I'm sorry. I don't know. Am I making sense, or have I completely lost you guys? Your eyes are like glazing over and you're half asleep now.
No, you're good.
No, we're taking notes. It's great.
I find this really interesting in when I think about the challenges that this quarantine has presented, and I think about what you had mentioned about physical space and vulnerability, and kind of where we are in our family. And I think many families that I speak to, there's like always one person who kind of like shapes the weather for the family. And in ours, it's one of our children who's like the most sensitive. He's, pretty anxious and can feel down quite frequently. And in our home is where, he's able to kind of like feel that the most and kind of let that out. And so during this time, it's really challenging for everyone else in the household to kind of not take on that weather as it's kind of like storming through. And so as we're kind of talking about the unhealthy and healthy, a lot of that, when I look at this, I think about children, and I don't mean that in an offensive way to anyone who's thinking about their spouse as they're reading this. I think, if you think about raising children, you definitely can see the healthy pieces are the things that are really important for us to, hold children accountable, be clear and have, expectations and boundaries. And it's our job to like follow that through, even with these like brains that are like developing all of their pathways, and their prefrontal cortex isn't like, connected and working for them. And so there's like all this stuff. So anyways, I know there's not a question in there. It was kind of just my compilation of this, I guess. Yeah. Weathering that storm that sort of like happens and kind of engulfs, and then trying to interrupt those patterns is challenging.
Absolutely. And if you as a family were to decide that this sweet child of yours that has struggles, if you were to decide that they are no longer going to set the weather in your home, there would be a lot of discomfort and a lot of confusion and a lot of anger. But it doesn't mean that it wouldn't be a healthy choice. I'm not telling you to do that or not do that. But I'm just acknowledging, like, this is the script. This kid sets the tone for the household, and we all do it. That's the script.
Yeah, no, I completely hear you. And I think for some people, it's easier to not internalize that. And then, once that weather's set, then it's like the more people that kind of glean onto it, the more contagious it gets, right?
Sure.
So no, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Good advice, or not advice, as you said. I don't
Some
know. I don't know
observation.
if you were advising or not advising.
No, I don't have enough information to actually give like thorough advice about this, but it's just an observation that if people were to decide to handle it differently, there would be a lot of discomfort until it became the new script. Not every script is bad, so we just have to rewrite it.
Some are just more fun than others.
Yeah. Yes.
I just want to encourage all of our viewers who are not panelists here that if you have questions, you can send them in via the chat option, whether you're watching on YouTube or whether you're watching here in the webinar in Zoom. That is all.
I'm curious about, I feel like there's a certain level of, I don't want to say flexibility, but sort of with the heightened stress from this, that you allow for people to have their moments of either that Hulk explosion or that sensation of wanting to just escape or have some time to yourselves. But at what point, as this becomes something that might be for a long time, can we start saying, okay, we need to find different ways of releasing the emotion that you might be feeling just in general, or more heightened because of the circumstances that we're in?
Can you help me understand the bottom line question of what you're saying? Like, at what point, can you repeat the question part of what you're saying?
At what point can you say, hey, the coronavirus is, and the fact that this is going on in the world is not a reason to have like, to have heightened stress or to feel like a higher level of because I think, you know, I live with my in-laws who are elderly and they're consistently stressed and like walking around like on pins and needles, and you kind of want to be like, we've been in this for 2 months, we might be in this for a year, like I can't live like this, you know. So that is sort of the idea. And even myself, if I'm snappy at everyone, I'm like, oh, it's the coronavirus, that's why I'm so snappy, because I'm stuck in the house all the time, you know. Like, at what point do I have to start holding myself more accountable or holding them more accountable that we're in this circumstance and we have to find better ways of
So you're basically saying, how long can coronavirus be our scapegoat?
Yeah. Or even, I think, you know, you're trying to, even with children, you're kind of help through this process and help them understand. But eventually I think there might have to be a conversation like this might be a new normal for a while. The idea of that, using this as an excuse for actions.
I mean, the answer to that is a little bit different. Like, how you handle your in-laws is not how you're going to handle your children. I think we can't, I would say with children, constantly encouraging them to communicate what it is that they're going through and what it is that they're feeling and thinking is probably the best thing that you can do. And so they might, even if they claim that the reason is coronavirus, like whatever sparks it is not necessarily, like there's still stuff to unpack in terms of what they're feeling, regardless of what it is that sparked it, if that makes sense. But generally, like with the people around us, like our peers and our in-laws and stuff like that, the best thing that I think you can do is just choose your own behaviors and your own actions and not get caught up in their experience of it all. Because we can't say to someone, stop being so stressed. We all do. We all try to say that, but does it ever work? Like, nobody's ever like, oh my God, I didn't even think about that. Like, thank you. I'll stop being stressed now. So that doesn't work. So the best thing I think that we can do is realize that we're part of their system. We're part of their bigger experience. And when we change our behavior, it causes a ripple effect. A change in one part of the system causes a change in the bigger system. So maybe you decide, like, how have I been reacting to this blame on coronavirus? And how do I actually want to be reacting? How do I want to carry myself? And again, there will be frustration, there will be discomfort, there will probably be anger, but it's because you're rewriting the script. So if you want there to be a change in the dynamic, you have to own your part in that change and act on it, and then see what follows suit. But if we're always feeling responsible for how how other people are perceiving things, or like wanting to change how they perceive things, it's a very frustrating place to be, you know? So yeah, the best that I can offer is you conduct yourself in like with your own centeredness guiding you, and people can take it or leave it. And I say that with respect to your in-laws, but they can take it or leave it with love. Does that answer your question? Okay. All right, Jessica, what are you saying?
I'm a little curious about exploring this idea of accountability, whether it's with other people or ourselves. You know, I think in the past, when I would try to hold myself accountable, it was kind of in a harsh way.
Yeah.
You know, like I was trying to like force myself into changing.
Yeah.
And that just didn't work for me. And when I had this realization one time that what I needed in order to hold myself accountable was actually very different than what I thought it was actually compassion.
Yeah.
That I needed compassion, like that compassion for myself would lead to a feeling of safety with myself. That safety would lead to vulnerability with myself. That vulnerability would lead to more awareness of what I'm actually doing and how I'm actually feeling. And that awareness is what could lead to change.
That's really beautifully put.
Thanks.
Do you want to give this talk? I don't know. What's your point?
But I think, like, you know, when we talk about like setting boundaries with other people and holding them accountable, I think we can easily slip into like this, like you were saying, like turning away from people.
Yeah.
And being like, you can't do that, and walking away, and just kind of this, like, yeah, trying to force things or being a bit harsh or blaming. But we have the capacity, we have the ability to set boundaries, to hold ourselves and other people accountable with compassion, which blows my mind, actually, because where do we see that in society? I don't really see examples of that out there. And yet it seems, I mean, I guess I'm saying I don't see it out there. And yet at the same time, I'm like, and yet it works. I'm like, well, how do I know it works? It works on me, but I don't know if that's a Jessica thing or if that's a human thing.
No, I think as humans, well, now I can just get on a whole other soapbox, but I will. So I think it works on humans because we respond to love much better than we respond to anger. You know, I mean, if we just look at like the social media vista out there these days, it's all about people being filled with rage and anger at the current state of the world, and then wondering why nothing is changing, and call out culture of like, I'm going to call you out on your privilege, and now that makes me a social justice warrior, and then, but oh, you're not listening to me and you're not changing, I'm typical, and then we wonder why nothing changes, but really we're just running around angry at each other and calling each other out. And no, people don't respond to that. When somebody throws darts at you, your shield is going to go up. You're not going to be like, oh yes, please let me receive this. But when somebody comes towards you with love, like genuine love and compassion, then you are receptive. And I think, I mean, you said that you don't really know where you've seen examples of this. I've seen examples of it with children, mothers with their children, fathers with their children.
Yeah.
You know, we're very patient with them when we know that they're trying. And we know that they don't know better and that they're doing their best. And so we have way more patience for that than we do with our loved ones that are our peer. But really, I think most of us are doing our best. But when we get older, we have narratives and baggage that cloud the lens. They smudge up the lenses that we use to view the world. And then we fight rather than love.
Right.
But I also think that in our society, we equate love with weakness or softness. when really I think it's a sign of great strength to be able to love in the midst of pain.
Can I ask, could you maybe, either you or Jessica, give a couple of examples of compassionately, or give an example of compassionately holding your spouse accountable? Just like a general.
Jessica, do you want to offer anything?
I'm much better at doing it with myself than I am with Devin at this point.
Devin's like, yeah.
Yeah, right.
True.
Actually, so Devin is a night owl and I'm not. And my sleep was really being affected. And actually I asked him if I could talk about this, and he said, yeah, this was earlier. My sleep was really being affected by that. And we have a toddler and I'm already waking up in the middle of the night sometimes. And it was really affecting my well-being. And in the beginning, I was like blamey about it. Like, we've talked about this, like, you don't respect me, you don't care about my well-being because you're not coming to bed on time. And so there's this, like, energy of like blame, and I was trying to hold him accountable, but I was doing it with blame and judgment. And then I just finally somehow hit a wall and realized, well, that doesn't work. And so I think because I was also developing compassion with myself, I was able to extend that to him. And we said, I kind of just set up a boundary, and it really did seem like a very non-charged boundary. And the boundary was, okay, if you decide to stay up after 10:30, and this was an agreed upon boundary, or like not a consequence of, we agreed upon it between us. It wasn't, I was telling him he had to do this thing, but at 10:30, if he didn't want to come to bed, then he would sleep on the couch so that I could go to bed and get sleep. And so we were able to set this clear, non-charged boundary. It wasn't a punishment. I stopped blaming him for it and just realizing, like, he has reasons for wanting to stay up. His brain works at that time. He's an artist and a very typical artist in that way, and so.
Besides Devin. Also a night owl. You can't shut your brain off just because it's 10 o'clock.
Right.
I
can. Why can't you?
That's when I would like to do my best work.
No, it's not that you can, it's that you do. You just naturally shut down.
Yeah, I do.
It's not how those rhythms work, Jessica.
Yeah, and I realized that, and I'm like, this is just how he's wired. And it doesn't mean that he doesn't love me or care about me or respect me. I'm still trying to convince myself of that sometimes, but I know it's true.
The beautiful thing about that, though, is that you arrived at a conclusion or at an agreement that if you weren't in a healthy headspace, and if he wasn't in a healthy headspace, you guys could take personally and be like, oh, I have to sleep on the couch. Like, I'm your husband. I should be able to sleep next to you. Like, it could have escalated, but you're instead staying centered, and you're in a space where you're like, you need your sleep just as much as I need my nighttime time. And sleeping on the couch seems fair. And it doesn't mean you love me any less. It doesn't mean I love you any less. It just means I'm being mindful of your needs and of my own.
And it did escalate in the beginning. Sure. It did feel like a punishment to him. And I think that this is actually an example of where it says, I hold you accountable, even if it means that you disconnect. And so in the beginning, he was disconnecting and was feeling like it was a punishment, but quickly that subsided. And I did stick to it because I'm like, this isn't a punishment. Like, we decided upon this. And it didn't happen only a couple of times. And then it was like, oh yeah, this is just a natural boundary.
Nice.
Yeah. I hope that answered your question, Leah. I'm not sure if it did or not.
Yeah, that's great.
I think it just comes down to talking to them with love rather than rage. And it has to be sincere. So if you are angry, don't fake it. Like, wait until you're in a better headspace and then you talk about it. But it's about love, and it's also about, again, trusting that they're doing their best. Like, at the root of all of this, we have to trust that our partner is trying, that they're doing their best. And it will never be perfect for us, but it doesn't mean that they're not trying.
I just want to do a real quick time check. We've got about 12 minutes.
Yeah, that's why I was going to say maybe we should, let's go on to the next slide. So this might even answer some of your questions. Does somebody want to read this quote from Abdul Baha?
Sure. They must then proceed with the utmost devotion, courtesy, dignity, care, and moderation to express their views. They must in every matter search out the truth and not insist upon their own opinion. For stubbornness and persistence in one's views will lead ultimately to discord and wrangling, and the truth will remain hidden.
So again, for anybody who might be watching, this is a quote from Abdul Baha, who is one of the central figures of our faith. And sorry. What? Abdul Baha? So it's just a little bit of guidance on how to approach some of these conversations. So this is advice, this is guidance on how to consult, on the art of consultation, which is very much an art and something that we have to practice to learn. So maybe, for those of us that are wondering how to talk about these difficult things, this is something to keep in mind. These elements of devotion, courtesy, dignity, care, and moderation. Like, how often do we actually weave in courtesy, dignity, care when we're talking to our partners? We let ourselves kind of like be extra ugly with them sometimes, I think. Let's go on to the next slide really quick. So these are just a couple tips on how to resolve conflict that I wanted to give you guys. These are like scientifically researched tips on how to approach these difficult conversations that need to be had. So there's six tips. So there's 2 slides that cover this. One, the first tip is called softening the startup. What research has found is that usually discussions end on the same note that they begin. So if you go into it angry with guns blazing, it's usually going to end on some kind of angry tone. So you set the tone in the beginning of the conversation, and that tone will determine how it plays out, how it ends. If you start too harsh, you end with tension. If you start with softness and respect, you will probably end with softness and respect. So again, this is why you don't talk if you're in a nasty headspace. Also, and I always get on my soapbox about this too, this idea of never go to bed angry is like this thing, it's this trope that always rolls around in the advice that we give people. And I just want to acknowledge that it's like one of the dumbest pieces of advice that we could ever offer. Please just don't ever do it. Because like when you're hulking, like think about the Hulk again. I don't know why I keep talking about the Hulk. This is kind of embarrassing, but let's talk about the Hulk. When does he stop being the Hulk? He has to sleep it off, right? He literally has to sleep it off and pass out, so don't like,
Are we giving advice based on a Marvel movie?
I
am. Good.
Yeah. No, the example of the Hulk is just, it's so perfect for some of this idea of like flooding, which is what you experience when you're overly excessively angry. Second tip, accept influence. Actively looking for pieces of your partner's perspective that you agree with. This is, again, I feel the need to emphasize, this is all scientifically researched. Like as your partner is offering their perspective, their experience, their suggestions, look for parts of it that resonate, that make sense to you. Like let your ego, like set it aside and actually look for points of agreement. The other thing that research has really found with this is that men have a specifically difficult time accepting the influence of their wives. So keep that in mind. So the happiest couples are the ones where they allow themselves to be influenced. This is really a fancy way of talking about humility. The third point is make effective repairs. So if you're in the middle of a difficult conversation, having well-timed repairs can really save you. In my parents' household, I hope they're not watching because they'll be like, thanks for outing us. But like with my parents, whenever they would be in the middle of a disagreement or an argument, my dad always knew exactly when to crack the most hilarious joke. And I'm convinced that it was just this like silver bullet to diffusing these arguments. But timing matters. So, and this is another thing that they found with when researching this, like the timing is critical. You need to know your audience, and you need to know when it's time to be funny and when it's time to listen. And it takes two people. So other repairs involve, you know, affection, holding hands in the middle of working things out, compliments, anything like that, humor, anything that actually just diffuses the tension. And it takes two people to make this work. It takes the person who is attempting the repair, and then it takes the person who is the receiver to allow themselves to be soothed. You know, you do reach a point where you choose if you're going to stay angry or not. You don't have to. So you have to also allow yourself to diffuse the anger. Can we go to the next slide? Fourth tip is de-escalate. So reflect back what your partner has said to you, so you show that you're listening and that you actually understand what they're saying. And rather than getting defensive, fighting about it, you offer a solution. Compromise is good, but actually offering something that makes both parties happy is even better. So if you could go beyond each person compromising and actually go into a space of each person feeling completely validated, that's ideal. So compromise is good, but mutual satisfaction is even better. And then the fifth tip is soothing of self and partner. We talked about this a second ago, like take a time out if you're just in a space of it's feeling overwhelmed and it's just too much. Sometimes you just, if you are flooding, if you are to the point where you're just seeing red and you're on the brink of hulking out, what you have to do is you need to take a break and do something completely unrelated to what it is that's making you angry. You have to just actually physically activate a different part of your brain. So it could be like, I'm going to go for a walk. I'm going to listen to music. I'm going to do some art. I'm going to sing, whatever it is, but you need to engage a different part of your brain. Even if it's like, I'm going to think of a name for every letter of the alphabet. It doesn't matter what it is. It's just switching where you are in your brain. And then number 6 is compromise, which we just talked about a little bit. It's impossible to totally compromise unless you accept that both of you are imperfect. And it's easier to compromise when you focus on what you're grateful for in your relationship rather than thinking about like, I wish they were more X, Y, or Z. If you constantly are thinking, I wish they were more patient, I wish they were more, that they were better at consultation, I wish that they were, less defensive, hanging out in the I wishes and the if onlys, it's a disservice to both of you. I think the next slide is the last one. Oh, no, it's not. But we did talk about these things. So just elements to nurture your relationship. So don't put your relationship on cruise control, especially nowadays. So many people are like, I'm just in survival mode, but that's not an excuse for disconnecting from your partner and not continuously giving to the relationship. And I've talked about most of these things, but I really want to emphasize the vulnerable conversations. Vulnerable conversations consistently that go beyond who's picking the kids up from soccer practice and who's making dinner. Like they go beyond household maintenance and they go to like actual heart-to-heart check-ins. This is the antidote to every marriage, and it's also the biggest ingredient in maintaining a happy sex life together 20, 30, 40 years into your relationship as well. is consistent vulnerability. Like, I think the research says 3 times a week for at least 10 minutes. So it has to be intentional. You can't just go into cruise control of like maintenance. You have to consistently check in, because we're dynamic creatures who are always changing, and your check-in with your spouse from a year ago is definitely not going to be where they're at today.
And
So
just to clarify,
huh?
times a week for 10 minutes is the vulnerable conversation, not the sex.
Yeah, I knew that's what you were saying.
I was like, wait a second.
No, 3 times. I mean, having sex 3 times a week for 10 minutes, like, knock yourself out. If you want to be like scientific about it, it needs to happen at least once a week. The duration is up to you, but it does need to happen at least once a week.
But we were talking about the vulnerable conversation.
The vulnerable conversations need to happen multiple times a week. But since you brought up sex, that also needs to happen, but that only needs once a week. If you want more, great, but bare minimum is once a week. And then the last slide, I think, is the last slide. Somebody want to read this? I've been talking a lot.
I can.
Okay.
Physical pain is the necessary accompaniment of all human existence, and as such is unavoidable. As long as there will be life on earth, there will also be suffering in various forms and degrees. But suffering, although an inescapable reality, can nevertheless be utilized as a means for the attainment of happiness. This is the interpretation given to it by all the prophets and saints who, in the midst of severe tests and trials, felt happy and joyous and experienced what is best and holiest in life. Suffering is both a reminder and a guide. God's wisdom is indeed inscrutable to us all, and it is no use pushing too far to discover that which shall always remain a mystery to our mind.
Thank you. I just wanted to kind of end it on this note that we're all going through pain and difficulty, but that we can actually use this experience, as painful as it is and profoundly painful for people experiencing loss, that it can still be used as a means for attaining happiness. So using these tests in order to actually achieve happiness and joy is a pretty powerful, because tests bring growth and growth brings joy. So it's a pretty powerful, it's very powerful potential for us to tap into. So I know we're at time. I don't know if you guys had any last minute thoughts or questions.
I think a question came through in the chat. I saw that pop up from Nava. It says, what does that consistent vulnerability look like? And what is an example of that type of check-in?
What does that consistent vulnerability? Okay, so it's anything as simple as, how is your heart these days? Like, a lot of times people assume that vulnerability means negative conversation. It doesn't have to be. It's just an emotional check-in. How are you feeling? What are your hopes, your fears, your joys, your sadness? What is it that brought you joy recently? What is it that maybe brought you anxiety recently? How are you feeling about our marriage? That's another question that I think is really critical to ask. And a lot of people either don't think of asking it or are too afraid to ask it because they don't want to hear the honest answer. But even checking in and saying, like, how are you feeling about us? Like, what can I be contributing? How can I contribute to us being even better? So it's just a heart check-in to make sure that you're still clear on the inner workings of your partner, so that they don't become just a glorified roommate. You know, you stay tuned into everything, because especially right now, people are struggling, and stuff is coming up that you didn't know was going to come up, and you didn't think you were going to have to work through, or you didn't think was going to be a test. And it's hard. It's really hard. Relationships are being tested, and it's just a sensitive time. I hope that answers your question. Oh, good. You're welcome. Other thoughts or questions?
What have you found that most couples are struggling with the most right now during quarantine that is specific to this time, or not specific?
It's interesting. I haven't actually had a lot of couples coming to me for help right now. But I've gotten a lot of individuals coming to me who are in a state of very deep self-reflection. Like my clientele has like doubled in the past couple weeks because people have got nothing but time on their hands to just reflect and think about what they want to work on. A lot of people joke and say like COVID is an experience where like it's like God has sent us all to our rooms to think about what we've done. I'm just seeing that a lot of people have become very self-reflective. What the research tends to show is that couples who are good, who are generally like thriving and happy, this time together is actually enhancing their relationship. But on the flip side, couples who are struggling and who may have been miserable for a long time are now being pushed to their breaking point. So like in China, when people were really allowed to start leaving their homes, the number of people who filed for divorce like skyrocketed. And my understanding is that they had to implement regulation as to how many people could file for divorce a day because it was just so high. Yeah. I mean, also they have like a bajillion people living there, but just the fact that there was such a surge says a lot. But again, on the flip side, it's helping a lot of couples too. We're going to have some quarantine babies coming out in the next 9-10 months.
Yep. Well, if no one else has any other questions, thank you so much, Nura.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Oh, something.
Yeah, thank you guys for tuning in and talk your ears off.
Thanks to all of our panelists for agreeing to be here and making this more of an interactive experience for all of our viewers in their homes. If anybody out there is interested in learning more about the other activities that Greenacre is up to and will be broadcasting, you can check us out at greenacre.news. Also, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and you can see videos like this. I think it's youtube.com/Greenacre Bahá'í.
Are you sure about that?
Pretty sure. We just got it. So we have a few great videos up. Actually, Nura and Penn Badgley are up there. They gave a great talk last weekend as well.
It was fantastic. Thank you.
Stop.
No, it was.
Stop. Well, and hopefully we're gonna do it again. So
yeah,
please do.
Yeah. All right. I think I've covered everything I needed to cover. Thanks to Robert for running the background side of things.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you guys for letting me into your lives for a little bit. It was great to meet some of you. Great to see some of you from a long time. I knew David when I was in grad school, so like it's crazy that like so much time has passed and
you're doctor.
And I am doctor now. That's really weird.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is great.
If any of our viewers, if you all have ideas of programs that you want to see, or if you want Nura to come back and you have questions, email us at greenacre@usbnc.org. That's usbnc.org. And maybe we can do a round 2 potentially. Yeah. All
You
right.
can
everybody.
follow me on Instagram.
That's right. Yes. Yeah. Oh, yeah. And Greenacre too. Follow Greenacre on Instagram too.
Oh yeah, there's that.
Facebook.
Way to hijack my spotlight, Jessica.
Sorry. All right. Greenacre and Nura.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Nobody cares if I'm not accompanied with pen touch. So
Not true. Actually, I just got some messages about that. People are like, we love Nura.
no, stop.
Yeah. No, it's true. All right, everybody. Have a great evening. We'll see you next time around.
Yes. Love
Good
you guys.
night.
Good night.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.